Now, my mother had 19 years to put up with this wayward son and his out-of-bound ideas. But my wife, Tisa, has had to live with this for 33 years, where we celebrate Christmas somewhere in the last 2 weeks of December, birthdays where we find a day somewhere in the month of its occurrence, and the children have lived with this process throughout all of these movements, and strictly based on my desire to do what I was asked to do. And then at the end of the career, after flying international flights, they changed the international rule for retiring pilots. You could then go on to age 65. I was 60, and before the law was changed in the United States. But I must admit that I went into retirement happily, knowing that there was another Captain Wilkerson flying the airways in the United States. That's my son, Ryan Wilkerson, flying with the Legion Air. And his wife, Samantha. His wife, Samantha, and we have 2 of the 3 grandchildren here tonight. Also, I would like to point out my daughter, FIT graduate in New York. She lives in New York, works in the fashion industry, and a marathon runner. For the second year, she knocked 21 minutes off of her last year's time. Iman Wilkerson. My youngest son, Landon, he's a Johnson & Wales graduate in culinary. He worked at the M restaurant in Wiesbaden, Germany, doing his apprenticeship. And he's now working at Red Roosters restaurant in Harlem, New York. So I want to say that throughout the course of developing a great career, I hope that I've been able to share with my family, with my friends, and also respect the good advice that was given to me by so many, and not only good advice, but at critical times, great help. And I want to point out something, because we're so close to Powell Airport, Knoxville, where I started flying, that this is back in the 60s, the early 60s, and I think that a lot of us remember that the 60s, our social structure was quite a different place. And my class, the graduating class of 1964, is here in large numbers, and we graduated, we were the last segregated class to graduate from the Knoxville school system. And we grew up with the notion that, and the understanding that there were just certain things that we could not do. We had restrictions, or they were only done at just certain times. So when I went out to Powell Airport to take flying lessons, it was really based on the fact that I could get there using the Knoxville city buses, and then there was a community county bus that left downtown Knoxville to Powell. So when I arrived at the airport, I did expect some sort of a restriction. But I'm here to tell you that what I discovered was no restrictions. There were no restrictions. As a matter of fact, I discovered actually enthusiasm. Enthusiast and enthusiasm. And that's what I found, that in aviation, you find, and in this room, is full of a lot of enthusiasts. They seem to be very helpful, sharing, and willing to give you all the good advice to do what you need to do. And so there's no reason, it's no wonder that this is the industry that I've wanted to spend my life in. And I find myself finding other groups, like fly fishermen, I think maybe it was a picture. They seem to be enthusiasts. and a lot of enthusiasm. And so I've certainly enjoyed this entire experience beyond belief. Now, in my last few minutes here, I really want to point out that without knowing it sometimes, there have been inductees into this Hall of Fame that has had a major effect on my attitude, understanding, and respect for aviation. And one of the first people inducted was Evelyn Bryan Johnson. And I met Evelyn on my second solo flight, cross-country flight. And that was up to Greenville, stopped in Morristown, and as I was preparing for the last leg, back to Powell, Evelyn landed. Of course, I had heard of Evelyn before, and heard her on the radio, but I had never met her. She walked over to the airplane and she stood in the doorway, and we talked. And I can't remember exactly the conversation. I think Evelyn would, but the sentiment was there. And from that moment, I could not pass very close to Morristown, Tennessee, without stopping and seeing Evelyn Bryan Johnson. Another person that has had an effect on my life and understanding, after I left Knoxville, at the Davis Mountain Aero Club, the instructors would have these sessions where they would argue about what controls what. And it was Bill Kirshner's books that someone would eventually reach for, and that would solve that argument immediately. Bill Kirshner is an inductee into this Aviation Hall of Fame. Today we use Kirshner manuals. Pete Campbell was presenting his new program of flight instructor refresher courses when I was in Tucson, and we all jumped in an aeroplane and flew up to Phoenix to hear what he had to say. And it was at that presentation that Pete put together for me the role of the FAA, the regulations, the airways, the systems that created what they wanted was safe flight. And that relationship with understanding the FAA's role and the rules has served me to this very day. It's with Bob Sutherland as a result of this, and I've never called the FAA feds after listening to Pete Campbell's presentation. And by the way, I'm sure that if there's anyone here that has a copy of Pete's presentation, or you can tell me where I can find a copy, I would love to have that. How about Bob Hoover? I didn't know that Bob Hoover was a fellow Tennessean, but we used to chase him all over the state of Arizona and New Mexico to watch him fly his P-51. But it wasn't until Bob was flying the Shrike Commander that I had a personal relationship with Bob Hoover, because I was working on my multi-engine rating at the time. It was a Piper Apache, 150 horsepower aircraft with each engine, and at 2,500 foot field elevation in Tucson, and on a 90-degree day, I realized that I had to do better. I had to do a better job, more right rudder. Bob Hoover's influence. Major General and also Captain Fred Warmack. Fred was and he's here tonight, he was the director of flight operations at Piedmont Airlines when I was a pilot. And he would publish an article in our Piedmont Pilots Bulletin on occasion. And he taught me the value of the economics of flight. He said in one article, I think it went like Piedmont's gross net profit was like $40 per flight. Well, it didn't sound right. But if you do the math, it comes out to about $36 million a year. So he would encourage us to watch the brake use thrust reverse, watch the throttle, 0.74 Mach. And that's what I've done throughout my career, understanding those basic factors. Another notable inductee to this Hall of Fame was Robert Gilliland. last year's inductee. I was introduced to Robert Gilliland by Giacinta Kuntz Bradley. She's here, the author of the book that's on auction, The Pioneer of Mechanics in Aviation. Robert was asked to give a group of 2 NTSB members, pilot and rider, a tour. It's around Amelia Earhart's fundraising out at Burbank, California, but a tour of the museum at the Burbank Airport, where Robert explained to us the development and operation of what was declassified of the SR-71. I knew that Robert was a fellow Tennessean. It was really quite a day. But it wasn't until we were outside and we were standing at the base of a podium that housed a 104 starfighter, F-104 starfighter, that was pointed at the heavens, that Bob began to explain how he used to zoom a 104 into near space. We would start out about 50,000 feet, a 1.2 Mach. And he said that the 104 still had throttle at that point. He would then push it into afterburner, pitch up to 45 degrees of pitch. And at about the time, the apex, closing on the apex of the top of the climb, he would have to shut the engine down. If he had the CG just right, the plane would tip forward, re-enter the atmosphere, and if he could get a relight, he would relight and land. So in these experiences with individuals from this institution, I say that was over the rainbow. And thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.